Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I don't know about you, but I had no idea that this graphics card existed. It's called the RTX A400. Please don't confuse it with the A4000 because it's in a whole other category. Now it's the cheapest RTX workstation card I could find. I paid £150 for this, and let me say right off the bat that if you're thinking about buying one of these for gaming purposes, you're probably best avoiding it because there are other options available. You know, your 1660 Supers, you can pick up an old RTX 20 series card for similar money and it's going to outperform this thing. This is more of a video just to see whether or not this thing can game, because if you want to buy it just for gaming, I can pretty much tell you that, yeah, you're going to be disappointed. So, the RTX A400 launched earlier this year, April 2024, I believe. It's based on the GA107 graphics processor, the Ampere architecture, so you can think of it maybe as a sort of severely cut down RTX 3050 6GB, though it's going to perform pretty awful in comparison to that thing. So we have 768 CUDA cores here, 4 gigs of GDDR6 memory, and the card features a 64-bit bus width, so you can see where this is going. Now, as an RTX card, however, it does support ray tracing, and we do get modern features such as DLSS as well, which will help us out in a few of today's tested titles. The card runs in PCIe 4.0x8 mode, though when idling this will drop down to 1.1 or 2.0 mode, as cards often do. This actually works with game-ready drivers. I installed the latest drivers at the time of this video, which in today's case was version 560.94, and there were no issues with that, though of course separate workstation drivers are available. This is a 50-watt GPU, so very low power, and it comes with a low profile bracket, at least the one I purchased from Ballycom here in the UK did. There's no external power connector here. We have 4 mini display ports, and if you're looking for a workstation card that's going to fit in a tiny form factor system, then this could be ideal. You know, the low profile bracket, the small stature of the card, and the lack of external power means that for certain scenarios this might be just what you're looking for. This is a gaming channel, however, so we must see what it's capable of. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Jumping into the game centre, we will start with, in no particular order, actually in alphabetical order, Apex Legends. I went with 1080p resolution, as I did throughout this video. We went for high textures, everything else set to lowest, and TSAA for our form of anti-aliasing. It's either this or off. Now on average we saw 92 FPS, so definitely playable here. The 1% figure was 66 and the 0.1% number was 61, so pretty consistent for Apex. We possibly could have pushed the settings up a little more, but we do have to be wary of that VRAM limitation, just 4 gigs of GDDR6 attached to this GPU. As you can see, the card is not consuming any more than 50 watts of power, which is nice to see, especially as part of a workstation card. I'd love to see a really low power version of entry-level cards like the 3050, for example, as well, just to see how it would perform. Something that comes in at less than £150 would be good, but whether or not we see such a thing at the lower end of the market, it's really hard to tell at the moment. Everything just seems like it's in a bit of a mess, to be fair. Nothing too exciting hitting the market at the moment, in my opinion anyway. But that's a rant for another day. So we'll move on to Baldur's Gate 3. Now I started off with the low preset in TAA, and we do see at least 30 FPS. I think that's sort of acceptable in this game. It's not too fast paced, so I think 35 FPS on average is fine in my opinion. 30 was that 1% low, and the 0.1% figure was 29, so playable to an extent, but of course we can make use of DLSS as I mentioned before with this card, just as we can with standard RTX 30 and 40 series GPUs. So I went with the quality mode to try and bump the frame rate up a bit, and here we saw 44 FPS. This is definitely a better way to play. The percentile lows were also bumped up a bit too, which is nice. Counter-Strike 2 up next. Now I usually go with low, but as a GPU benchmark I thought I'd push the graphical settings up a little bit. Sort of irrelevant, I guess, for this online competitive title. I'd recommend sticking with low for the most frames possible, but medium with AA off. Granted, 129 FPS from this card. The 1% low was 74 and the 0.1% low was 36, so this represents the occasional dip or drop in performance, but it was nothing significantly noticeable. You're going to have a great time in CS2 with this card. Though, as I said at the start, probably not worth buying for gaming purposes. There are better options for similar or less money, especially on the used market. And I mean, a 6GB 3050 isn't going to cost you much more than this thing did brand new either. So it's not a great card, but it's better than this for very similar money. Elden Ring is of course capped to 60 FPS, but that's irrelevant because we couldn't even hit 40 FPS. 39 was the average here, with the low preset and high anti-aliasing. Now I did actually set the preset to medium to start with, and it was basically identical. The percentile lows were a little bit worse, but overall performance wasn't spectacular to say the least. I bumped up anti-aliasing to high because it eliminates some of the jagged edges, but 39 FPS I guess is playable, especially in a third person title like this. I always prefer 60 these days, as I'm sure most of you do, but 39 isn't horrible, and neither were the percentile lows. In Forza Horizon 5, for at least 30 FPS, I mean we could have gone with medium or even high preset, but I stuck with low and enabled TAA for 57 FPS on average. DLSS would help us out a little more of course, but I didn't really feel it was necessary here, and there will still be moments whereby we see at least 60 frames per second anyway. The 1% low was 50 and the 0.1% low was 49, so again, really smooth, really consistent from this baby RTX card. The RTX A400 in all its glory. I never thought I'd see an RTX graphics card with just 4GB of VRAM, but here we are. I'm sure it has its uses, as everything does. It does of course have 4 mini display ports to power 4 native 4K displays, which is pretty cool, especially from a workstation or office perspective. But gaming, if you power 4 4K displays with this thing and try and run anything, well, you're going to see a bit of a PowerPoint presentation on screen, put it that way. GTA 5 I thought was a sure thing, to be fair, even at the very high settings, and it certainly was for at least 60 FPS. I mean, we set the sliders to halfway, enabled soft shadows, and chose FXAA as the form of anti-aliasing here for a very nice 69 FPS on average. The 1% low was 55, and the 0.1% low was 50. Overall, it was a very smooth and enjoyable experience with this RTX card, this budget RTX card. I've added Once Human to the benchmark lineup. This is of course a free game through Steam, 1080p with the very low preset here for 55 FPS. Certainly could have pushed things a bit higher. We do have a resolution scale slider as well if we want to try and bump up the frame rate. I think playing at least 30 FPS here would feel fine from the third person perspective of course, but I stuck with very low for 55. The percentile lows do leave a little to be desired, coming in at 38 and 21, but overall this was a pretty enjoyable experience. It's pretty early days for me in this game, but I'm having a good time so far, so I will continue to leave it in the benchmarks. If there's any other titles that you want me to add, just let me know. Oh boy, now for Starfield, yeah, there's a brief sort of gameplay video here of what it's like without any help from DLSS, but I wouldn't call it playable. Pretty headache inducing in my opinion. To actually get at least 30 frames per second, which still doesn't feel great in Starfield to be honest, we need the lowest settings, and we also need DLSS set to ultra performance. We also have the option of CAS or FSR, but as a card that supports DLSS, I thought we may as well enable it here. 33 frames per second in and around a key, that doesn't feel too horrible. It doesn't look great, but it's not as blurry as say enabling the harshest form of FSR is in this game in my opinion anyway. But there we go, 33 frames per second for Starfield. A better result than I was expecting, considering when we ran at native resolution it was like 15 to 20 FPS, so a nice little bump in performance here. Maybe we could enable frame gen as well, but that's going to feel pretty horrible when we're starting off with less than 60 FPS to begin with, in all honesty. Now we've got a few different results for Cyberpunk 2077 of course. 1080p with the lowest settings to start with gave us 34 FPS, a 1% low of 28 and a 0.1% low of 20, so you know, fair enough, it was playable, similar to how I experienced it on consoles when it first came out, but the less said about that probably the better. If we want to try and squeeze more performance or combine a sort of balance between visuals and performance, then we're going to need to retain the lowest settings, in all honesty. Luckily it still looks pretty good, but we're going to want balanced DLSS too. 46 FPS in that case. Feels a lot better here. 35 was that 1% low and the 0.1% low was 26. So it's a lot smoother, a lot more enjoyable. But of course we cannot neglect the fact that this card supports ray tracing. So yeah, with ultra performance DLSS and RT on and set to ultra, we do scrape 30 FPS just about. We could turn some of the ray tracing effects down a little bit, but I think if you're going to enable RT in a game, you're going to want to go all out, right? So RT on, set to ultra here for 30 frames per second. We can definitely tell that the game looks better. It's a shame that it is a lot more blurry, of course, but that is necessary. Realistically though, would I suggest playing with ray tracing on? Absolutely not. It is best left off with a card like this, that's for sure. At least in AAA demanding titles like Cyberpunk. There may be a few games out there that are going to work fine with RT and this GPU. Cyberpunk isn't really one of them, not consistently anyway. It's not consistently smooth experience, as you can see by the figures. I've got a couple of different results for Red Dead Redemption 2 as well, because to be honest, I could play at ultra textures with everything set to lowest and TAA medium with native resolution at 33 FPS all day long. I mean, it's similar to how I experienced it when I first played it on the PS4 with 30 FPS, so I'm used to it. 30 was that 1% low and the 0.1% low was also 30 according to these figures, so I mean you can't complain at that, very smooth indeed. If we want to retain similar settings but boost that frame rate up a little bit, then DLSS balanced is the place to be. I think turning the sharpness down in this case would have looked a bit better. It was a bit over sharpened in my opinion, but 43 frames per second with DLSS balanced enabled, a 1% low of 40 and a 0.1% low of 39. So again, no issues with consistency here, and the game still looks pretty good. As long as you've got the texture set to ultra here, then it's going to look pretty decent. The geometry LOD was also set to max, and the grass LOD or level of detail was set to 2 out of 10. Finally then we have Fortnite. Should be pretty easy to run, or so I thought, but we're best remaining with the low preset here in order to try and get as many frames as possible. I think when it comes to Fortnite, graphics aren't all that important, similar to CSGO, you know, and I'm not sure as many people are bothered about the graphics in these games as they are in others, but you know, it's going to vary from person to person. Here with the low preset, 100% 3D res and TAA, we saw 111 FPS with a 1% low of 66 and a 0.1% low of 11. This basically hinted at a couple of dips and drops here and there, and there were sort of a couple of micro stutters, but that was it really, nothing too off-putting. But overall, the RTX A400, not to be confused with the A4000, which is like a 16GB beast. This 4GB 64-bit bus width GPU did okay, I think. Don't buy one for gaming, but if you do see one, or you come across one, or you happen to have an office or school machine with one of these in, and you think, I'm going to fire up CS2 now while I should be doing my work, then you'll be pleased to know it will run, and hopefully this has given you some idea of what this card is all about. DLSS is also supported, as is ray tracing. DLSS you'll need, but RT is probably best left off. Anyway, this has been the A400. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Leave all your thoughts down below in the comments as well, because I love to read through them all, and I'll see you in the next one.